So welcome. Whether this is your first class or you've been here since the beginning, I'm glad that you're here. A special welcome to Susan, who's joining us. And we're going to get started. So some of you, I'm guessing, have a lot of experience with Passover. Some of you have not so much experience with Passover. So we're going to go over some basics. We'll do some nuggets that might be new. And at 11:10, 11:15 or so, I will deal with the children because I'm also trying to run a Hebrew school. And so I'll help them get into their breakout rooms, and that'll be a chance for you to get up and stretch and schmooze. And then we will continue 11:20, 11:30, depends if all the madrichim show up and I have to work with any kids or not. But we will pick up after by 11:30-ish or so. So please stay on if you would like to keep going with us. Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll do some basics now, and then we'll have a chance for you to talk about ask questions, and then if there's time, we'll go into deeper nuggets. So Passover, it's a Jewish holiday. That's, a very fundamental fact about Passover. Jewish holiday, it is in the Bible, in the Torah. Not all the holidays are, but this one is. It celebrates the Jews being rescued from Egypt by God through the agency of Moses and Aaron a little bit. It's also an agricultural holiday celebrating the wheat harvest. You make matzah out of the new wheat that has just been harvested for Passover. That's how I can keep straight whether it's the barley harvest or the wheat harvest. And it comes in the spring. And the fact that it has to be in the spring is why the Jewish calendar is not a strictly lunar calendar. Because if it were a strictly lunar calendar, then the holidays would move up by 11 days every year, as the Muslim calendar does. And eventually Passover would not be in the spring anymore. But the Torah says Passover has to be in the spring. So every 7 out of 19 years, which is roughly every 3-ish years, we add an extra month to make it a leap year, and we bump everything down so that Passover stays in the spring. I believe next year will be a leap year, so Passover will be, so starting with Purim, everything will be bumped down, but before that, everything will be up a little bit by 11 days. All right, questions so far about Passover? About the things I've just said? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the next level of detail about Passover. So the Torah says multiple times that you should be kind to the orphan, the widow, and the foreigner because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Because of that, the rabbis wanted to make sure that there was a way for us to remember what it was like to be strangers in the land of Egypt and to remember the Passover story. That it's not just history for us, but it's memory. So in the Mishnah and fleshed out in the Talmud, they devised the Passover Seder, which they modeled after the Greco-Roman Symposium, because Passover is about celebrating being free, and the freest people in the world were the upper class of the Greek society and later the Roman society. And so just like they sat around and ate hors d'oeuvres and talked about important questions at their symposia, the Jews were like, we're going to do that too, but we're going to talk about like Jewish stuff. Specifically, what does it mean to be free? So, and we're going to lean when we drink because that's what they did. And in fact, that's why we lean to the left. The Talmud says it's because there's some concern about like windpipes and trachea and esophagi getting crossed and choking in wine. Probably it was actually because if you were a Roman and you were drunk and somebody said something to you that wasn't meant to be an insult, but you took to be an insult, you would want to have ready access to your sword. And since most people are right-handed, if you are leaning to the right, you can't get to your sword so easily. So if you are leaning to the left, then you can reach out your sword and avenge your honor. So this is probably why we actually lean to the left when we drink wine. So we have the Seder. Seder is a Hebrew word with a Hebrew root, just like English words have Latin and Greek roots, Hebrew words have Hebrew roots. So the Hebrew root, the three-letter Hebrew root is Samech Daled Resh, which means order. It's the same root as the word Siddur, which is a prayer book, because in a Siddur, prayers come in a certain order, and at the Seder, we do things in a certain order. There are 15 steps, or 14, depending on how you count them, to the Seder, and we will go through them after we hit some of these more basic things. One of the other things that the Torah says about Passover is that you're supposed to eat matzah on Passover. Matzah is a cracker, for all intents and purposes, made of flour and water. From the minute the flour touches the water, you have 18 minutes to get it in the oven. Otherwise, it is just a really expensive cracker and not good for Passover.
Isn't it 18 minutes until it's out of the oven, until it's completely done cooking, I believe? Or is that?
That is possible. In all honesty, I am drawing my knowledge on this from the children's book, The Mouse and the Matzah Factory. And the number 18 is mentioned, but I'm a little fuzzy.
I think it's cooked. I think I've heard it was 18 from the time until the time it goes into the oven, but it doesn't spend very long in the oven. No, they cook very quickly.
All right. So, we'll leave the question unresolved. In the Talmud, they would call this.
But isn't it also it's not supposed to touch water before the wheat and all that kind of?
Yeah, it can't have rained within a certain number of days of the wheat harvest and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. In the Talmud, they talk about these sorts of situations as teku, which is an abbreviation for we will leave it unresolved until Elijah comes and announces the Messiah and solves all of our unresolved questions. So I will declare this a teku question until I can consult the Rav Internet, Rav Google, Rabbi Google, and we will see what the internet has to say on this matter. And I'm sure it will probably have multiple answers, just like a good Jewish source. So we eat matzah, and we eat matzah instead of chametz. Chametz is leavened bread. Chametz is anything from the 5 browse grain: barley, rye, oats, wheat, and spelt. Also the same 5 grains that you can't eat if you're gluten intolerant. And browse is the way that I remember them. So any of those grains where there's been leavening happening, no good. So instead of chametz, we eat matzah. Now, the question is why are we eating matzah? the Torah gives two different answers about matzah, and these are also reflected in the Haggadah. And I'll explain the Haggadah in a minute. The Torah says that we ate matzah during the first Passover, so the night of the 10th plague with the death of the firstborn. The Jews were supposed to have barbecue, basically, lamb barbecue. And they were supposed to eat their roast meat with bitter herbs and with matzah. So matzah was something that they ate kind of during slavery, before they left Egypt. The Torah later says that they ate matzah after they left Egypt because they left so quickly that they didn't have time for their bread to undergo the first rise. So they just stuck the dough on their backs and the sun baked it. These are not mutually exclusive, it should be pointed out. They could have done both. And matzah could therefore be the bread of freedom because we were on our way to freedom and then we were actually free when we ate it. The Haggadah is the book that we use when we do the Seder. Here's my favorite one, A Different Night. It's cheap, only $10-ish, complete, has transliteration and translation and readings and pictures. It's a good Haggadah. But there are many other good ones out there as well, and people make their own as well. I believe Ed is an expert on this. And with the advent of the internet, there are all sorts of resources for putting together a Haggadah. There is a joke, why do we have a Haggadah? So we can Seder right words. So in the Haggadah, it says that it says two different things about matzah. One, it says that a certain rabbi, Rabban Gamliel, says that you have to talk about three different things, or it's as if you didn't do the Seder at all. It doesn't count. One of them is the Passover sacrifice. One of them is the bitter herbs, and one of them is matzah. And for each one of them, it gives an explanation why we have it, why we're talking about it. And for matzah, it says because we ate matzah when we left Egypt quickly. Earlier in the Haggadah, it says, halach ma'anya, this is the bread of poverty, de'achalu ahavtana, that our ancestors ate be'arad de Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt. So that seems to imply that matzah was this bread that we ate as slaves because we didn't have time for long, luxurious meals when we were slaves and had to go back to work quickly. So it was kind of like the ramen noodles of Egypt. You make it quickly and you go back to work. So you can take whatever explanation you like. Some people call this the bread of paradox because it could be either one. Some people say it's about changing your mindset. Do you see this as a bad thing or as a good thing? It's all on how you look at it. Cup half full, cup half empty sort of thing. And then people make all sorts of other explanations about why we eat matzah. Matzah's plain gets along with everybody, so we should get along with everybody. Matzah's not puffed up, so we shouldn't get puffed up and be arrogant. All sorts of various things. Like many things in Judaism, you have probably the actual reason why it started, you have the reason that is ascribed to it why it started, and then you have all these different layers of meaning that you can take from it, and they all coexist like a multi-layer cake, which is one of the wonderful things I love about Judaism, and people can add their own layers of meaning as well on top of it all. So, other things. So let's go into the Seder plate. My actual Seder plate is packed away with my Passover things because I have a lot of chametz, kosher Passover things out since we're still 2 months away, 9 weeks away. But I have here a pretend Seder plate. I suppose it would do in a pinch if I absolutely had to, then I could wash it, but this will do for now. It's a thing that you could color if you were so inclined. So on the Seder plate, we have a couple of things. We have parsley, karpas, which is a green vegetable, or a vegetable that grows in the ground, available during the springtime, such as potatoes. And so we eat parsley because it reminds us of spring and hope and rebirth and that sort of thing. We dip the parsley in salt water to remind us of the tears of the slaves. Next to that, hold on, I'm getting a text from my wife. And Judaism values shalom bayit, peace in the house, so I had better answer it. Okay. Next to that, we have the maror. The maror is a bitter herb, usually horseradish. Could be other things, but it's usually horseradish. People will either use the horseradish root itself and just take off a tiny bit of it, or they'll use the mushed up white horseradish, or they'll use the mushed up red horseradish, which is the white horseradish with beet juice, to make it slightly better. And we eat horseradish to remind us of the bitterness of slavery. One of the things it says in the Haggadah is Bechol dor vador chayav adam le'od etzmo ki'ilu hu yatzah mitzrayim. In every generation, a person should see themselves as if they left Egypt. And so by eating these different foods, it helps us to actually imagine ourselves as if we were there. Again, to turn history into memory. The next thing we have is the shank bone, the zroa. The shank bone is the shank bone represents the Passover offering in the temple. And that is because of the lamb that they ate when they were leaving Egypt. We also have the beitza, which is the roasted egg. And the roasted egg is because of the holiday offering that was offered in the temple. This is discussed in the Talmud, which is a collection of Jewish laws and various other things. There is the custom of daf yomi, of studying one page of Talmud every day, and then in 7.5 years, you'll get through the entire thing. And the daf yomi for today, or at least sometime this week, talks about this very matter. Talks about why they had to have the festival offering, because if you just went with the Passover offering when everybody was making pilgrimage to Jerusalem, there wouldn't be enough food for everybody. So if you have the festival offering, then all of a sudden you've got enough food for everybody. So that's a good thing to do. So we have that as well. Then we have the charoset. Charoset comes in different forms. The Ashkenazi version, Jews whose families come from Eastern and Central Europe, tends to be apples, walnuts, cinnamon, and grape juice or wine. The Sephardi version, these Jews whose families originally came from Spain and then went to the Middle East or other parts of Europe where they were welcome, tends to vary based off of what sorts of ingredients are locally available. So you can so some communities have dates and honey, and then like ginger, and wine, or oranges, or banana, or cardamom. Like there's a wide range of different recipes. If you're interested, send me an email and I will send you my collection of haroset recipes from around the world. The haroset is supposed to represent the mortar that the Israelites used to put the bricks together. Personally, I think the Sephardic versions look more like mortar than the Ashkenazi versions, but you work with what you've got. Poland is not known for its date collection in a pre-globalization era, for instance. So you work with what you have. Then we have, so that's 5. If you have a Seder plate with 6 spots, the 6th spot is for Chazeret. Chazeret is there because there was a dispute between the rabbis about what exactly you're supposed to use for your bitter herb. And so they're like, fine, we'll just have both. So you can use, so Chazeret tends to be romaine lettuce, but you could use other bittery things as well if you so chose. Some people today also put an orange on the Seder plate. The orange on the Seder plate is because in the 1970s, the story goes that Susanna Heschel, the daughter of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who marched with Dr. King, was in Florida speaking about why women should have full participation in Jewish ritual life, which was a big deal back in the 70s. I understand. I wasn't actually alive then. And so a man stood up in the audience and said, a woman belongs in the bima where prayer services are led, just like an orange belongs on the Seder plate. And so because of that story, people are like, yeah, let's put an orange on the Seder plate just to show that we believe in inclusion. Reportedly, the orange on the Seder plate may have actually had to do with LGBT inclusion instead of female inclusion. Either way, it's an innovation for inclusion. You're welcome to do it too. If you can get a clementine, they take up less space in the Seder plate, but you work with what you've got. Okay, questions about the Seder plate? Seeing none. 2 other customs that you should know of while we're talking about basics. During the Seder itself, one is that we take a piece of matzah, traditionally the middle one of the stack of 3, and we break it in half, and we hide half of it. And this is called the afikomen. Afikomen is from a Greek word which either means dessert or orgy. We go with the dessert translation. It is traditionally the last thing that you are supposed to taste. And the rabbi said that you have to eat the afikomen by midnight. This was their attempt to keep the Seder from going on too late. Seder still may end up going until 3 or 4 in the morning, but at least dinner has to be done by midnight. Keeps people from getting cranky and hungry. So, so you can't finish the Seder unless you have the afikomen, which has given an innovation opportunity for the afikomen to get stolen or hidden. And then often it is the children. Sometimes the children are the one doing the stealing and the adults are doing the ones finding, or they're not finding. Many different customs around this, but either way, there's a ransoming of the afikomen, usually preceded by a finding of the afikomen. And this is something that children look forward to. One of the many ways that we do things differently on Passover to keep kids engaged, so that they'll ask, why is this night different from all other nights? Because questions are a good thing. So there's the afikomen. The other piece after that is that we open the door for Elijah. And we do this because in the biblical book of Malachi, it says that Elijah will come to announce the coming of the Messiah. And because Elijah, as a biblical prophet, was supposedly swept up to heaven by a fiery chariot and didn't actually die, therefore he gets this ability to come back alive. Also, this is why in Jewish folklore, Elijah tends to show up in various guises and like be super helpful because he didn't die supposedly, so he can do this. So we open the door for Elijah and we sing a song to Elijah and then we go back. It's a convenient 7th inning stretch. You get a little fresh air depending on how open you open the door. And people pour a cup of wine or grape juice for Elijah, welcoming him, sort of like the grown-up version of Santa Claus, except, you know, our Elijah goes around the world and gets wine. And does it 2 nights in a row. And some people have the custom that everybody pours a little bit of their own cup into the cup for Elijah, symbolizing the idea that we all contribute to bringing redemption. Some people also have a cup of water for Miriam. This is a more recent innovation because in the Bible, Miriam is associated with water. We first see her when she is watching her brother Moses by the Nile River. We later see her dancing with her timbrels after the Israelites have crossed the Sea of Reeds, aka the Red Sea, but probably not actually the Red Sea because that would put them in Saudi Arabia. Then when she dies, right after that, the Torah says, and there was no water. And the rabbis are like, must not be a coincidence. There must have been a mystical well that followed the Israelites around in honor of Miriam, and when she died, there was no water. Probably, actually, she was just a really gifted water finder in the desert. Some people are good at that. But either way, because there was no water, that's why Moses hit the rock and then didn't get to go into the land of Israel. So Miriam is associated with water. So some people will put out a Miriam's cup next to the Elijah's cup and fill it with water. Keeps her in the story. Okay, questions about all of that?
So these are all customs. There's nothing that's written as a specific obligation.
Biblically, the obligation is to eat matzah and not chametz for 7 days. Everything else is either a rabbinic law or is custom.
What about the idea of passing the story along and keeping the story alive?
That's probably okay. It says biblically, it says when your child asks, you should tell them. So I guess biblically, if your kid doesn't ask or if you don't have a kid, then you are off the hook on that one. But the rabbis say, well, if you don't have a kid, then you should ask each other. And if you're having a Seder by yourself, like some people did this year, then you should just tell yourself. Good question. Yochanan.
So is the Seder itself, like the full meal, is that ordained by the rabbis in the rabbinically, or is it just part of beautifying the commandment?
Good question.
Did the Torah reading not deal with that this week?
The Torah reading this week was about the first Passover.
Does not mention in there from generation to generation. And it's a holiday you celebrate each year on a specific date.
Oh, let's see. I believe, my memory is, and I'm going to look this up as I'm saying it, that it says, yes, you don't do work on the first day and the last day of the holiday, and you tell the story. Here we go. So, Exodus chapter 12, verses 24 through 27. You shall observe this as an institution for all time for you and your descendants. Unclear if this means the smearing the door of the blood on the door, which is what comes right before that, or just the holiday in general. And when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as God has promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this rite? You shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, because God passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when God smote the Egyptians, but saved their houses.
Well, then it says you do it for each year. And if you have children, you have to tell them about it.
Yes. So it says that you keep Passover, but I'm guessing that, no, I'm not going to guess. I am confident that the Seder as we do it is developed in the Mishnah in the year 200
Right.
and is not what the Bible had any idea about.
Right, because that's all it says there. The rest of
Right.
the how you celebrate it and those formalities are not defined there.
Right. So they would probably be. So I think, Yochanan, to your question, and then I need to start moving children around, and you guys can ruminate about more questions, because that's what Passover is about. There are pieces in the Seder that are rabbinic law, and everything else is custom added on top of that.
And the customs do not violate the laws.
Right. As long as your customs don't violate your laws, you can add more customs.
Interesting subtlety.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. All right, it looks like the children have moved themselves for the minute, so I will talk about one more thing. Thank you, Justin, for that link.
That's Larry
yeah.
King explaining the Seder, since he just passed yesterday, and it's a pretty fun little 5-minute video. Just
Awesome.
great. So
Thank you. One more piece about this is the 4 questions, which have evolved over time. And if you want a whole long source sheet about that, that's a class I did last year, and can send you like how the 4 questions evolved. So email me afterwards. But the Mishnah says that you should prompt your child to ask these questions, and the modern version of the questions, which is similar to the Mishnaic version, is really 1 question, 4 answers. Why is this night different from all other nights? Because on this night, on all other nights, we eat chametz and matzah. Tonight we eat matzah. On all other nights, we eat all kinds of vegetables. Tonight we eat bitter herbs. On all other nights, we don't even dip once. Tonight we dip twice, parsley in the salt water and the maror in the charoset. And on all other nights, we eat sitting up. Why on this night do we recline? This leads, and the 4 questions in Hebrew are known as Manish Shana after the first 2 words. This leads to the story that some of you may have heard of, I may have heard, and some of you may not have heard, which is that there was a Jew who was going to be knighted by the Queen of England, and everybody is supposed to say a certain Latin phrase when they get knighted, when it's their turn. And the Jew practiced and he practiced and he practiced, and then everybody is kneeling and getting knighted and saying their phrase, and it's his turn, and he gets knighted and he's supposed to say his phrase, but he totally blanks. So he says the first non-English thing that he can think of, which is Mani Shana Halaylo Hazeh Mikol Halaylot, And the queen turns to her advisors and says, "Why is this night different from all other nights?" So you are welcome to take that with you to this Passover if you can remember it 9 weeks from now. And if you can't, just email me and I'll tell you. Let's do a run through the Seder, a quick tour guided approach. On your window as we go flying past, you will see this, and on the left, you'll see that. And then we can get to your questions. So the first step of the Seder is Kadesh. Kadesh is where we say Kiddush over the grape juice of the wine. It comes from the root Kuf Dalet Shin, which means holy. So we are saying, just like we say on Shabbat, we're saying for Passover, this time is now holy. It is different and special and not the same as the rest of the year. So we start with Kiddush, and that is the first of 4 cups of wine or grape juice that appear throughout the Seder. The next step is Orchatz, where we wash our hands without a blessing. We're washing our hands because we're going to eat, but there's no blessing because we're not eating bread.
Is that that one is the optional one that takes it from like 14 to 15 steps? Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
It's not that there's a step that's optional. It's about whether or not you count them as separate steps. And that comes later. I will try to remember to explain that when we get there. The next step is Karpas. That's step number 3. That is dipping the green vegetable, usually the parsley. Be careful that you can tell the difference between parsley and cilantro when you're buying it at the store, because otherwise you'll be surprised. I made that mistake once. So dipping the green vegetable in the salt water. There's a Sephardic custom to use lemon juice instead of salt water, but the pretty common one is salt water.
Does it have to be parsley? Because
No.
because what we do is we buy all kinds of green herbs, parsley, chives, chive flowers, which look really pretty, and cilantro, and we put them in cups all over the table so everybody can pull out whatever they want.
Yeah, it does not have to be parsley. Parsley is most common, but as long as it grows in the ground and hits that blessing, then you can use it. In Eastern Europe, people use potatoes because they were cheap and had the right blessing.
My mother's parents used potatoes. My father's family used pieces of onion. And so we always had both potatoes and onions at our Seders.
Cool.
We don't use either. We don't use either.
After this Seder tip, it is helpful to bring out like vegetable hors d'oeuvres because this keeps people from getting hungry and cranky until you get to dinner. And you've said the blessing, so you can do so. The next step is Yachatz. Yachatz is breaking the middle matzah. I like to think of this as if you held the middle matzah in your left hand and raised your right hand and went, "Hi, Yachatz." You don't actually do that, but that is how I remember that is what that step is for. One of the halves gets wrapped in a napkin and then gets hidden or stolen, depending on your custom. The trick is to do it in such a way that anybody who might be finding it does not notice. The next step is Magid. Magid is telling the story, and this is where the highlights are. It is the longest section of the Haggadah and the second longest section of the Seder, surpassed only by dinner. So this is where I have to consult the actual Haggadah because I do not remember the order of the highlights of Magid. So we start off with Halach Ma'anya. This is the bread of affliction. And we say, let all who are hungry come and eat. in that. Then we go to the 4 questions. Then we have the 4 children. Banim could be translated as the 4 sons or the 4 children. So the 4 children are the wise one, the wicked one, the simple one, and the one who does not know how to ask. Note that even the wicked one is still at the table, at least. One of the things that I love about this Haggadah, A Different Night, compact or non-compact edition, is that it has different artworks throughout the centuries of the 4 children. This is them as playing cards, an Israeli one, a German one. This is the 4 children in all of us from the Rabbinical Assembly Haggadah, that each of us has all of them. This is claymation. These are books, the open one, the blank one, the closed one, the one on fire. You can come up with at least 3 different interpretations of this one, which one is which. There are the Marx Brothers. Yeah, so lots of fun things that you can do with that. One of the highlights of this Haggadah for me. There's also a song, the Ballad of the 4 Sons. Such to Clementine, said the father to his children, at the Seder you will dine. You will drink your 4 cups of matzah. You will eat your fill of matzah. You will drink 4 cups of wine. That was written, it's not always attributed, but it was written by Ben Aronin, who is a Chicagoland Jewish educator, worked at Anshe Emet, and happens to be the great uncle of my wife. But that is a fun addition to the Seder, and I was using it for years before I even met my wife. So if you don't know the Ballad of the 4 Sons, I highly encourage you investigating it. It is a much faster and more enjoyable way of going through the 4 children. We have a note. Yes. Ruby had a note about using a faster version of the Seder. When I was in Hillel at WashU, we had different Seder options, and one of them was the Speedy Seder, known as In and Out of Egypt Quick. I was put in charge of that, and one year I got it down to 2 hours, including dinner. And ever since then, I've had no patience for really, really long Seders since then. Now that I have a small child, I continue to use my skills. Yeah, Seders don't have to go on forever. And when they do, it's often because of the talking. And Ruby has a note that there's a 30-minute Seder book, which is very nice. And although I don't know it, I'm sure it is. So the things that I'm mentioning are the ones that would be in the 30-minute Seder book, because these are the bare bones that you have to say. Then there's some Midrash, which you could totally skip. It takes 4 verses and blows them up with commentary and dissects every word, and is interesting, but not really necessary. Then we have the 10 plagues, blood, frogs. Some people translate kinim as lice. No, that one's lice. The 4th one, arov, some people translate as wild beasts, some translate it as swarms of insects. Take your pick. Cattle disease, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and death of the firstborn. There's a custom that for each of these, we dip our pinky or our spoon into the cup. We're on the 2nd cup now of wine, and we put out a drop onto our plate or a napkin. We are diminishing our joy because of the suffering of others. A full cup of wine is a full cup of joy. Try to remember not to lick your finger or your spoon thereafter, because then you're deriving pleasure from others' pain. Although that does lead to another question, another joke, which is, what do you call someone who enjoys eating the bread of affliction? A masochist. So, take that for what it's worth. Then we have Dayenu. Dayenu means it would have been enough. from the Hebrew word die, which is enough, and nu, which is us. And occasionally you will see Israeli parents scolding misbehaving children in supermarkets saying die, which means enough, and they get weird looks from everybody because everybody thinks that the parents telling their children to actually die. But yes, so Dayenu, it would have been enough for us. It's a really long song, but there's the short version, which says that if God had if God had taken us out of Egypt, that would have been enough. If God had given us Shabbat, that would have been enough. If God had given us the Torah, that would have been enough. But God did all these other things. How much more so should we be grateful? Judaism is big on having an attitude of gratitude. Then we have Rabban Gamliel, who said you have to talk about Pesach, the Passover sacrifice, the matzah, and the maror, or doesn't matter how long your Seder was, it didn't count. Then we have, in every generation, a person should see themselves as if they left Egypt. And then we have the beginning of Hallel, which is a set of Psalms. We have Psalms 113 and 114, and then we move along to the second cup. And that is the end of Magid. After that, we have Rachatza, which is washing the hands with a blessing. Some people, to speed things up, they do Orchatz as a ceremonial washing where just the leader washes on behalf of everybody, and Rachatza everybody washes. You can all get up. You can bring a bowl and water and a towel around to everybody. If everybody gets up, that is a great time to hide the afikomen. But you do it as you need. Then we have Motzi Matzah. This is the 14 or 15 because it depends if you think these are one step or two. But you do them either. You do all of it either way. Motzi is where you say the motzi, the blessing over bread. Matzah is where you say the blessing over eating matzah. It is something that we are commanded to do in the Torah, so it has the Asher Kishan b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu phrase in it, that blessing. Ditto with maror, we eat the bitter herbs. We dip them in charoset for that. Then we have korech, which is the Hillel sandwich. Hillel was the rabbi who lived around the year 1, both years 1, they were right next to each other. So his sandwich predates the Earl of Sandwich. And the Earl of Sandwich invented his in the time of King George III. So 300 years ago versus 2,000 years ago. And the Hillel sandwich is matzah, maror, and charoset, replacing the matzah, maror, and roast lamb of the original Passover meal. Then we have the shortest part of the Haggadah, longest part of the Seder, which is Shulchan Aruch, eat the meal. And then we move on to Tzafun, which is finding the afikomen. Barech, where we say thank you to God. Generally, in Judaism, we have short blessings before we eat, long blessings after, because you can sit around longer after you're full. So we do that. The very short version of that is hubba, 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 thank you for the grubba, yay, God. But there are longer versions in Hebrew as well, and that's what you will actually find in the Haggadah. Then we have the third cup, then the cup of Elijah. Some people also do Shvoch Chamatcha, which is where you open your door or don't open your door and ask God to pour out your wrath on everybody else, on the people who oppressed us. Not really safe to do with your door open. So people tend to do that with their door closed. And then even if they are speaking Hebrew, and then do Eliyahu Hanavi, welcoming Elijah with the door open. Then we move to Hallel, where we sing more Psalms. I'm consulting the Haggadah because my memory gets a little fuzzy as to what exactly goes into which step at this point. Then we have the fourth cup. Then if then if you are outside the land of Israel, there is the custom of the second Seder. And this is because for a long time, Jewish months were decided based off of witness accounts coming to the temple or to the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem and saying, two people saying we saw a new moon. And then just like they did in The Lord of the Rings, fires would be set, signal fires, and instead of going across New Zealand, they would go across the land of Israel to Babylonia, saying there's a new moon. And outside of the land of Israel, nobody was really sure if they got the news on the right date or not. So they decided that we better make most holidays not Yom Kippur or Tisha B'Av. Most other holidays should be a 2-day holiday. Just in case we're wrong one of the days, we'll be right the other day. So on the second day of Passover, if you're not in the land of Israel or Reform, you're still having a second Seder. Either way, you are starting to count the Omer, which is counting 7 weeks per what it says in the Bible until the holiday of Shavuot. And the Omer is a bushel, basically. It's a measure of wheat, of barley, well, a measure of grain. But you bring your first Omer, your first bushel of grain, of barley, to the temple as a way of saying thank you to God for having a good harvest. And also this way the priests get to eat because they don't actually have any land. So we count the Omer, then we sing some songs. We're in Nirtza now, which is the last section. There's a song called Adir Hu, which is an alphabetical acrostic about how great God is. There's Echad Miyodea, who knows one, which is numbers 1 through 13, and something Jewish associated with each of them. Some people have the custom to, with this one, to try to do each answer in one breath. So who knows one? I know one is the Lord of God in heaven and on earth. All right, that's pretty easy. But by the time you get all the way up to 13, who knows 13? I know 13. And then you try to do it all in one breath. Easier in English, also easier if you're standing up, harder if somebody is trying to distract you. I speak from personal experience here. Then we have Chad Gadya, which is another one of these house that Jack built, building on itself sort of thing, where Chad Gadya, just an only goat my father bought for 2 zuzim, which are like ancient currency. Chad Gadya, an only goat. And then we have a lot of things. Oh, there's a cat right there. Speaking of cats, that cat does not look quite big enough to eat a goat, but that is theoretically what happens in the next verse. The cat eats the goat, then the dog bites the cat, then the stick hits the dog, the fire burns the stick, the water quenches the fire, the ox drinks the water, the slaughter kills the ox, the angel of death kills the slaughter, and God beats everybody. And this is actually a historical reference. The goat are the Jewish people. Our father would be God. 2 zuzim are the 2 tablets. And then all of the other things are world empires that beat up on each other and also beat up on the Jews. And then we have hope that God wins. The songs at the end are particularly fun when it is late at night and you're kind of loopy. They were even more fun when they were written because wine was not diluted back then. And so drinking 4 cups of super strong wine late at night and then trying to sing these songs, really fun. But now we have normal size wine and we just have our fun as we have it today. All right, so that is the Haggadah. What questions are there? Questions about the Haggadah or just Passover things you want to know in the last 5 minutes?
So are all these songs part of what is obligatory, or are those abbreviated? And many places, many seders I've attended have not been that complete after dinner, after saying grace.
Yeah.
Customs that have built up over the years.
So the songs are old. There's one last piece I forgot. Nirtza ends with next year in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't turn to the last page. That's why I didn't see it. There it is. Next year in Jerusalem. So you want to hit all the steps. And if your Nirtza is just next year in Jerusalem, which Shana Haba by Yerushalayim, all right, you are Yotze. That means you have checked that box. And also it's tired. And if people have to drive home, then they want to leave. And if they're kids, there's bedtime involved. So yeah, when I lead a Seder, I tend to say, okay, we're going to do Nirtza and sing Lashana Haba Abi Yerushalayim. And then if you want to leave, Geh Gesund, go in health. And otherwise we'll do 2 songs. And then if you want to leave after that, Geh Gesund, go in health. And then if you want to stay, we'll sing some more songs. But this provides exit ramps for people while still like doing things. I think I managed to do one of the years I did a speedy Seder, I managed to do the pre-dinner in 45 minutes and the after dinner in 15. But that's just about keeping things moving, not being like, what page are we on now? Having a plan, a written out, okay, we go to this and then this and then this with page numbers. So a lot of Seder timing can be dealt with by just having flow organized. So yeah, those songs are not obligatory, but they are old and they are definitely part of the custom.
Well,
depending on what
carries some of the spirit as well of the.
Yeah, even the Reconstructionist Haggadah. My wife's family is Reconstructionist, and so when we go to her parents for Passover, her father has graciously turned over one Seder to me, so I can make it a share-friendly one, and the other Seder he still leads usually out of the Reconstructionist Haggadah, and even the Reconstructionist Haggadah has Adir Hu with a note about, we don't actually believe this stuff, but it was important to our ancestors, so we're going to include it, because Adir Hu is about rebuilding the temple. So it's definitely part of the experience for a lot of people.
You want to talk about some of the less Ashka normative traditions, like the whipping of the.
Yes. Yes. So there are. So the Haggadah is pretty standard for everybody. There is a Ladino version of Who Knows One, Quien Supiese, that is fun to do. But there are many other fun Sephardic traditions, such as there's a tradition from, I've seen it as either Algeria or Persia or Afghanistan, somewhere yonder, of whipping the person in front of you on their shoulders gently with either a green onion or a leek during Dayenu, as if simulating being whipped in Egypt. There is a Moroccan and Tunisian custom of putting the Seder plate on each person's head and then lifting it off and saying, you are now free. So like physically experiencing carrying a burden and then lifting that off. There is a Kurdish custom, Iraqi Kurdish custom, Jewish custom of children. Well, there's a general Sephardic custom of people dressing up and acting out, leaving Egypt. The Kurdi twist on it is that the children leave the house, come and then knock on the front door, and you answer it, and they've got like a pillowcase, and some stuff in it, and there's it's a ritualized set of questions. Where are you coming from? Coming from Egypt. Where are you going? Going to Jerusalem. And what do you have with you? And then the stock answer is matzah, but then you can also like make it an actual interesting activity by like bring something with you that you would take if you were leaving Egypt, or just a discussion for older kids or people in general about like, what would you bring with you? What are the 5 things you would take with you if you were leaving Egypt on your way to Jerusalem?
Mm-hmm. Now that you're, oh, go ahead.
No,
I didn't mean to interrupt. I was going to say that you mentioned some of the Sephardic traditions. I just remembered that because for my wife, when we first started having seders, and even though she studied Hebrew as a modern language, still we got her a Spanish version of the Haggadah, and Sephardic, and some of the sequencing in the sections is not the same.
Interesting.
There's some differences. I can't give you the details now, but there are places where she says, wait a minute, this doesn't follow the Ashkenazi and the English translation, because hers is in Hebrew, and she uses many times as in Hebrew and Spanish rather than, and it was published by folks who are following Sephardic traditions. Huh. There's some slight bad, so we have to, wait a minute, it's over here. There's some slight differences there.
I didn't know that. Thank you.
At least in the version we have.
Yeah. Huh.
So what's your opinion of having the Seder on a different day because people come from Urbana and can't drive home and have to work the next day?
So I think there's power in having a Seder experience the same day as Jews around the world. There is nothing wrong with having 3 Seders. It's a lot of work. You could do a like pared down, we're going to talk about the story on the first night and like bring out all the fancy food on when everybody can be here together. I mean, some of the stuff theoretically you'd have anyway, like matzah, if you were eating matzah. So like you could do that. You could talk about the story. You could like have some of the discussion questions. You can make that your planning. Let's go through the Seder over dinner and like talk about what we want to do. That's sort of like a back way around it. But yeah, I would encourage you to have something to market, and then bring out the big guns for when everybody can be together.
I mean, there's no rule about the extent of the dinner, correct?
Right. No, there's no rule.
And there's nothing that says you can't have it 3 times or every night of the holiday or any other time.
Right.
So,
there's another custom, a Sephardic custom that has caught on in Israel. It's from Morocco originally, of Maimuna, which is right after Passover ends. You have this like big open house party, like the whole, like lots of people in the community do it. And you have sweets and bowls with coins as a symbolism for like prosperity in the coming 12 months. And like, it's a big open house party in the community. So kind of like what many people do of all going out for pizza right after Passover ends. And you might see other people at the same restaurant that you've chosen. But this is a custom that is gaining in popularity.
Right now, also, go ahead. I didn't mean to.
No, go.
No, I was going to say, mentioning that. I mean, when we had our congregation in Costa Rica, we had folks who, some who followed Sephardic tradition, and then we found that some of the foods that were acceptable were different.
Yes, key point. Thank you. I'm glad you brought that up.
Rice and some of these other things.
Yeah, kidney oat. So kidney oat are things that could be confused for the 5 grains, but aren't actually the 5 grains. So rice, for instance,
Corn.
corn, that would be the other big one. Soy, some people say. So Ashkenazi tradition has been to avoid kidney oat. Sephardic tradition has been to say that's ridiculous, we're going to have them. And the conservative movement issued a tshuva, which is an answer to a question, looking at the whole matter and saying, well, this is silly, you should have kidney oat. Okay, they didn't exactly say this is silly, but they said, we think that nonetheless, given all of the factors, conservative Jews should be allowed to have kidney oat if they so choose. In Israel, I remember when I studied abroad their first semester at Hebrew U, that the supermarket shelves would be papered over with the things that you couldn't eat on Passover. But they would have things that were still available, like certain breakfast cereals that had a little note on them on the box that said, Le'ochle kitniot. For those who eat kitniot, you can have this.
So now it's the other way, right? We go up before the Seder every year. We go up to the Jewish Jewel. Where is that?
Evanston.
In Evanston. And they have stuff that says contains kidney oat.
Yeah, right. That's true. In America, they do it the other way around.
Yeah. We decided some years ago that we were unofficial Sephardim because if we couldn't eat that, I couldn't eat anything. So we were happy to hear the thing last year.
Yes. So yeah, kidney oat is a hot topic among some people, but something that you will see perhaps in your Passover research. Justin?
So I'm always curious about kashrut whenever you see, what is it, like baking powder that's kosher for Passover, because I feel like that goes directly against the I don't know, the feeling.
Yeah, there's the letter of the law and the spirit of the
sodium
law.
bicarbonate. They don't call it baking powder.
Oh,
Baking soda.
Yeah. There's the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. I mean, you can get kosher Passover mixes for things like muffins, some of which aren't bad, cakes, cookies. There are recipes for rolls. I have not yet found a Passover roll that I enjoy as much as bread, but the muffins aren't bad. They're Passover cereals, which personally I like. I'm good with the granola and the Sunny-O's maybe, but the Crispy-O's not as much. I don't know, personal taste. I would not buy a lot of Passover cereal unless you have, like, I'd start with $1 unless you're concerned that the supermarket's going to run out of it. But things like fruits and vegetables are fine. Cheese is fine. Meat is fine. You know, you eat one of these healthier paleo diets or whatever that are in vogue for a week. A lot of potatoes. Macaroons, on the other hand, I find to be tasty. Lots of different flavors now. So, and you know, they're still good after Passover if you don't make it through the whole canister in 1 week. Yeah. The other thing is that the hechsher, the kosher symbol, if you the most common one is an OU, which is U inside of a circle. And that just means that it is supervised by the Union of Orthodox Rabbis. But if it's kosher Passover, they will have a P next to it. The P does not mean parv, which means neither meat nor dairy, because by default, OU will be parv. They'll have a D or an M next to it if it's meat or dairy. But that's something that I was confused about for a while, what that P meant. Yeah. Other questions?
What about selling your
Yes, selling and finding. Okay, good points. Thank you. So before Passover, there is bidikat chametz, searching for chametz, which was traditionally done with a candle, a wooden spoon, and a feather. And now can be done with a flashlight and a dustbuster, or if it is chametz that you have planted so that you make sure you find something like Cheerios, then, you know, whatever you want. But flashlights are still fun to use. And so after you do bidikat chametz, finding the chametz, then you do bior chametz. That's the night before the first Seder. Then you do bior chametz, which is getting rid of your chametz, traditionally by burning, but you don't have to. And then you also want to sell your chametz, which is because you're not supposed to own any chametz. So so you can do this one of two ways. You can either find somebody not Jewish in your life and make a short little contract with them that says, like, from this day to this day, I turn over, or so-and-so has the rights to all of my chametz. And then they buy your chametz for you for like $1. And then at the end of the holiday, you buy your chametz back and give them back their $1. So you can just do that. Alternatively, you can sell your chametz through a synagogue like Har Zion to the rabbi, and the rabbi then sells everybody's chametz to somebody else. And then you can make a donation to the synagogue if you so choose. I tend to prefer the personalized approach. It makes it a little bit more like real, and you have to explain what you're doing to somebody else. But you know, it is certainly easier to just fill out the form online and sell the chametz to your rabbi, who sells it to somebody. Yeah, there's also a fun passage in the Mishnah, possibly the Talmud, possibly the Gemara, about after your house is clean of chametz, what happens if a weasel runs in, and like you don't know if the weasel has chametz or not in its mouth. And I think it ends up being dependent on like whether the rest of the houses around you have also cleaned out chametz, because if they have, then you probably don't have to worry about the weasel or the mouse having brought chametz into your house. But it goes down this rabbit hole for a while, and then it's like, okay, enough of this. This is ridiculous. But it's a really fun passage of Talmud to read. Other questions?
I've got another one that I've always kind of been curious about is whiskey or bourbon, generally made from a grain. Now it's been distilled out, so they're all whiskeys and stuff. They're always gluten-free because there's absolutely nothing in there. So I was just curious on the, kashrutness of having scotches or whiskeys in the house and whatnot.
Yeah, I don't know. I tried looking that online just now, and I just got a lot of peach stuff instead of Pesach. So let me search again and see what, keeps giving me peach. Is bourbon kosher for Passover? There we go. No. Rav Google says no. Therefore, it is not kosher. That, yeah. And ditto with beer made from wheat, barley, spelt, rye, or oat. However, there is potato-based vodka that if you're desperate, you can find.
And also brandy is a good one, since it's made from wine usually. And
Yeah,
but I was
exactly.
just kind of curious because since they're like all gluten free, basic, or they're like people that are gluten intolerant can have it. I was curious on how that would work out. So
Yeah. No, it's a
You're
good
also
question.
not supposed to use vinegar unless you know that it's like from wine or something like that, because most vinegar is made from alcohol from grain.
Yeah.
In fact, I understand the red horseradish with the beets came from the fact that they used to make vinegar out of the beets, the beet vinegar to the horseradish, and that's why
Interesting. I did not know.
horseradish is red.
Huh. Cool. Thank you.
also, fun fact: if you have Marmite in the house, that is definitely not kosher for Passover because Marmite, it's usually like the Australian spread. I guess it's made from like
The dregs of the yeast.
It's yeast.
exactly for like making beer and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Oh,
it
so-
tastes horrible anyway.
I had to
Unless
get rid
you
of
grew
it
up
last
with it.
year. So,
Unless you grew up with it.
yeah. Well, it's a good thing so my wife's vegetarian, so I use that for cooking to get a little flavors, but it's not kosher for Passover. So
Oh, it's one of the, yeah, I guess if you use a little of it, it's like fish sauce.
Fish sauce, right, which tastes horrible but makes things good.
yeah.
The idea of doing cleaning out your house, and that like many people starting from Purim, which is a month away from this Thursday, they stop like buying new chametz and just sort of eat up what they have. The idea of having to like clean out all of the old grain is credited with why so many Jews survived the Black Plague and then were blamed for it, because the rats that brought the bubonic plague were not as attracted to Jewish homes because they didn't have as much old grain built up over the years. So, yeah.
Also, speaking of that one, also with the traditional hand washing and all that stuff is also another reason that
Yes.
Jews were, or at least a theory on why they didn't get the bubonic plague, because washing your hands and cleanliness was already part of the.
Yeah. Indeed. All right. Other questions? All right. Well, seeing none, thank you all for joining me.